are listening to Talk to Seattle, and I am your host, Jason Rigdon. Before we get to our guest, I need to ask you for your help. I am 100% independent. I don't have interns or assistants. Everything here is done by me. The hardest part of doing this show is finding potential guests and convincing them to come on the show. Because I am 100% independent, I don't have the prestige of a radio or TV program. I've also got the problem of my own reality bubble. I'm just your average straight cis white guy, and I'm sure I've got lots of blind spots about what is happening here locally and regionally. So if you like this show and you think I'm doing a good job, could you please help me? I need two things from you. First, I need your suggestions for guests. I'm looking for local and regional organizers, activists, politicians, and creatives that are working to make this a better place. I'm looking for folks fighting for equality and justice. If you know someone like this, would you please suggest them as a guest to me? The second thing I need you to do is to tell these folks that you want to hear them on Talk to Seattle. Let's be honest, not that many people know about this show. This show is kind of a niche within a niche. And also, some folks really don't know much about podcasting in general. So please reach out to the people that you want to hear on the show. Tell them why you like Talk to Seattle, and tell them why you would like to hear them come on as a guest. Suggesting guests and telling people that you want to hear them on the show is a way that you can directly help me and Talk to Seattle. Like I said, getting guests is the most difficult part of producing this show. If you can help me with that, I would really, really appreciate it. You can email me at jasonrigdon@gmail.com or DM the show on Twitter at Talk to Seattle, or call my voicemail line 425-835-2766.
So my name's Logan Bowers. I'm one of the volunteer co-founders of Seattle Approves. We're a all-volunteer grassroots effort to reform how elections are run in Seattle. And previously to this, I'm a trained engineer. My wife and I own #Cannabis in Fremont, and I once ran for Seattle City Council in District 3.
Yeah, and you're one of only a couple of repeat guests for Talk to Seattle. The other two would be Alex Zimmerman and Ari Hoffman. So you're in a rarefied zone.
Oh my gosh, I'm in that club. Oh no.
So could you tell me a little bit about this organization and what you're trying to do?
Yeah. So what we did is after the last kind of election cycle, we looked at the results, and what we noticed is that in the city elections, we have a lot of folks winning primaries that squeak through with 25% or less of the vote. And that happens when, maybe there's two great candidates in a primary out of a dozen, and they split the vote. And so that makes room for weaker candidates to squeak through, and then we get worse elected officials. And so we wanted to fix that. We want to make sure that Seattle gets the best representation it can possibly get. So that's why we founded Seattle Approves. And what we're focusing on is changing how city election primaries work to implement a different voting system called approval voting. So the way that approval voting works is in the primary, rather than having to pick one candidate out of 10 or 12, you can pick as many as you want. You can pick 2, you can pick 5, you can pick 10. Anyone you like, you can pick. And votes are still tallied, most votes still wins. But what happens is your vote is never wasted. You never risk splitting your vote across two great candidates. And so then the strongest candidates will then make it through to a top 2 general election.
And how does this differ from something like ranked choice voting?
Yeah, so approval voting, there's a whole bunch of options. Ranked choice is the one most people have heard of, but there's star voting, there's Condorcet voting, there's all sorts of different systems. The difference between ranked choice voting and approval voting is with approval voting, you pick the ones you like, and that's all you got to do. With ranked choice voting, you're putting them in order. You're saying, well, this person's number 1, this person's number 2, this person's number 3. We're super excited about approval voting for Seattle elections for about three big reasons. The most important one is that studies show that approval voting just works better in races with a lot of candidates. And in Seattle, our primary races have a lot of candidates. Last cycle, we had 2 districts with a dozen or more candidates, and I think that will be the norm going forward for every single race, including mayor, city attorney. So approval voting tends to work better in those circumstances. The other thing is approval voting is simpler for the voters. It's easier. to do on mail-in ballot. Nothing really changes on how the ballot looks, which is great. It's easy to explain, and it's easy to understand. And so we like that because that means more voter participation. The easier we make it, more voters participate, especially in primaries where the turnout's often lower. And then last, we did some technical research, and we know this is implementable by King County Elections using their existing software. So we know there aren't any kind of mechanical or technical hurdles to reforming our voting for the better. I mean, I think the big thing is all the systems that any kind of voting nerds talk about, like myself, they're all great. They're all way better than the system we have. So the nice thing is there's really no wrong answers here. Any of them are gonna really move us forwards.
Yeah, why do you think there is such resistance against kind of these innovative systems for voting?
Yeah, I think, well, anyone with power got it the old-fashioned way with the system that we have, and I think generally there's a resistance to change that because they might lose their power. And I think that's unfortunately the reality for how it works. There's a huge bias towards not changing anything. I also think there's some understandable resistance. It's like, well, you got to retrain voters to know how things work. I think we've seen that goes okay. Approval voting was approved in Fargo, North Dakota, and they've already had elections with that. And it was approved in St. Louis, Missouri this cycle in 2020 with over 60% of the vote. So, I think we're finally seeing like, yep, voters like it and it's ready to go. But I think that inertia takes work to overcome.
And don't these systems kind of violate the idea of one vote per person?
Yes, that comes up as well, especially in Washington State, where it's enshrined in our laws. And one vote per person never was intended to mean literally one bubble. You can pick as many bubbles in a race. It just means one ballot. And this is tested in Washington State law. Previous municipalities have used ranked choice voting, and there was another voting system, I forget the exact name, quite a few decades ago, used by another jurisdiction. So as long as everyone still has one ballot, which would be the case, then we still meet the one vote law.
And so I get my ballot. I've got, maybe a dozen candidates, like you said. Is there a limit to the number of people that I can approve?
No, there's no limit. You could theoretically approve all of them, though that I wouldn't recommend it because that's equivalent to voting for none of them. But yeah, so if there's, if you like all of them except one, you can pick all of them except one and then sort it out in the primary or in the general election. If you like 4 or 5, which I think will probably be the more common cases, you kind of browse the voter pamphlet and you're like, 3 of these candidates sound great. You can pick 3, 4, 5, however many you feel. With the top 2 primaries, you should probably pick at least 2.
Yes, this would specifically be for the primaries, not for the general.
That's correct. And so in Washington State, by state law, we have to have a primary followed by a top 2 general election. So the nice thing about using approval voting for the primary is we fit within that. So we don't have to make a change to state law. We can do it at the city level. I personally also just really like it because, when there's a dozen candidates, it's a ton of work for the voters to read through and research all of them. This gives folks the ability to kind of make a first pass, sort out the candidates, the top few that really work for them. And then when there's only 2 left for the general election, they can really dig in. So I actually think that kind of makes sense. A lot of folks, you don't want to get rid of the primary, but I think it's helpful, especially in these big races where folks can be left with 2 choices where they can really research, who they like the best.
So another criticism of the system, these innovative systems, is that already our elections people have a hard time counting the votes. Wouldn't this just cause more work for them and maybe more problems?
Yeah, well, that's where the technical research comes in, and we know that the existing voting systems can do it. It's a very minor change, right? Because you're still tallying the bubbles exactly as we tally them today. There's no physical structure difference to the ballot. The tally is still very straightforward to evaluate. It's like, did they fill in the bubble for that person or did they not fill in the bubble? Which we already do. So it just eliminates one case of errors, which is if they fill in 2 or more bubbles, instead of tossing the vote, we still count both, which is great.
And I think you said somebody was, but is anybody in the United States actually using the system right now?
Yes. So Fargo, North Dakota was the first city in the kind of recent history to select approval voting. They did so by initiative about 3 years ago, and they've already had elections using approval voting. They they specifically had a case on their city council where prior to the adoption of approval voting, they had a kind of weaker, less popular candidate squeak through due to vote splitting. They implemented approval voting, and then in the next race, it was actually decisive and very close, and almost certainly approval voting led to a candidate that had more support, was more popular, and didn't have their vote split between two different folks. It also meant they had a diverse primary where they had a few kind of long shot candidates with great platforms that got significant representation in the vote totals. The one other one, St. Louis in 2020, so just in this last November election, did pass it in a reform package for their local municipal elections. So that hasn't gone into effect yet, but it passed with, I believe, about 66% of the vote. So we're really excited to see that working there in a major city.
And your primary focus is getting this in Seattle, I think, right?
Correct.
And how have kind of local politicians and maybe party figures, if you will, reacted to this kind of thing?
We're in the process of reaching out now. It's still early days. We're mostly focused on the voters because we think this is important. That the voters drive what they want. Do they want approval voting? Do they want election reform? And we're hoping that our elected leaders will come along and support the popular will of the people. That said, every indication from our elected leaders is I think they'll be supportive and enthusiastic to see fairer elections, better elections in Seattle.
And how have those voters reacted? I know it's still quite early for you, though.
Yeah, well, we just ran a piece on Capitol Hill Seattle blog, kind of outlining our platform and soliciting folks to give us feedback. And the feedback's been overwhelmingly positive. I don't think we've heard anyone say they like the status quo. We're getting a lot of the usual discussion of which voting systems we want to choose from. But overall, folks are pretty enthusiastic because they see that more democracy is more better.
So then I think you touched on it a little bit, maybe with your experience of running. What kind of made you want to kind of start this organization and really put this amount of work into this issue?
Yeah. Well, I ran for council to make our city a better place. I really enjoyed growing up here, and it gave me a lot of opportunity, and I want that opportunity for the future. So any way that I can contribute to that, I'm excited to. And then from specifically from running, I saw these huge fields. I saw these really interesting candidates, and then I saw kind of incumbent power brokers really pull the levers for who got the votes. And I just think it's better when elected officials are more beholden to the people, where they do what the people want, and that's democracy. So I think we're going to forever have huge primaries in Seattle just because democracy vouchers makes the system very accessible, which I think is a very good thing. But we need a sane way to pick from that large field to have the best representatives we can possibly have. So I think the democracy vouchers really opened my eyes to how it makes the mechanics of the election very important to make sure we still get representative candidates out of that.
And are there other organizations trying to do this in other areas in the country?
Yes. So there's multiple chapters working on approval voting across the country. There's currently 6 cities. We're one of them that have applied for grants from the Center for Election Science, which is a nationwide nonprofit that advocates for voting reform, specifically in cities. So we're super excited. There's one in Austin. There's one in Denver. San Francisco has a group. So we're in good company. But I think we're on track to be number 3. So we're super excited.
Yeah, great. And so just to go over one more time, the mechanics of this is very simple. I get my ballot in the primary, and I just choose all the people I like.
Correct.
I don't have to choose between anything. I can fill in as many bubbles as I want.
Yep, that's it.
And then whoever gets the most, how would this work? Yep. The most total?
Every bubble you fill in counts as one vote, essentially. So it's kind of like every candidate is running their own race. Whoever gets the most approval, most bubbles, wins. Or in the case of the primary, the top 2 bubble getters. So it's still just tallied one vote for every person you check. If you check 2 people, it's not like you're hurting the other person that you checked. So primary, you just go down the list and see, who do I like? Who's a good contender, pick those.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like it'd be very confusing for voters. I know one of the critiques I've seen is that, it'd be confusing to voters, but it seems quite simple.
Yeah. And there are other voting systems that that perform like marginally better. And if you go look at the literature, like the ballot starts to get like crazy, and you're like, whoa, how do you explain that to a voter for what to do? But yeah, so this has a really nice trade-off of performs very well and is very understandable for the voters. And kind of as we saw in 2020, that the tallying is also very understandable, and that's kind of important too, it turns out. So there's no complicated like, oh, this person, the tally, everyone can just look at it and tally, and it's very straightforward.
Yeah. So if people want to learn more and get involved, where should they go?
Yeah. Best place to check out is seattleapproves.org. We're right now, we're kind of in the phase where we're soliciting feedback from everyone. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear what you think. Is this something that you want for Seattle too? Go to seattleapproves.org. We have a little 1 question survey and a comment box. Tell us what you think. And we want to get that feedback. Once we're working towards a goal, towards 1,000 Seattle voters that are enthusiastic and excited to get this rolling. And so you can help us reach that goal by signing up for the mailing list, joining our Discord to volunteer and help out. And if we get there, then I think we'll be well on our way to running an initiative. If we get that feedback, and we're going to listen to folks and chart a course as what we hear. So love it, hate it, whatever. Come visit us at seattleapproves.org and share a comment.
And are there any questions that maybe I should have asked you? Anything that maybe I missed?
No, I think I'm looking at my notes. I think you covered like all the key stuff. I think I do want to address one of the common questions we get is does this lead to blander candidates? Or do the candidates end up more boring? And I don't think so. I think they end up being more representative. Just as we were before we were chatting, I was looking at the data, and in November we just passed the transit levy with 80% of the vote, and that transit levy was clearly the council could have been more aggressive with transit. Voters overwhelmingly turned out and said, yes, we want more transit funding. So we have opportunities like this where folks can look at that and say, like, you know what, I want more approval for my next race. I'm gonna listen to the will of the people here. And so I'm really excited to see candidates be able to come in with policies and look at what the people want, and then be working hard to fight for every last voter to support them. I think that's how we get more of what the voters want.
And one more time, where should people go to find more information?
seattleapproves.org. 1 question survey. Take it. Tell us what you think. We'd love to hear from you.
Thank you so much for coming on the show again, and thank you so much for your time and the work you're doing. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Jason. And likewise, I've really enjoyed Talk to Seattle and the Jason Rigdon Show.
Talk to Seattle is hosted by Jason Rigdon. For more information about this podcast, please visit talktoseattle.com. If you would like to support Jason's work financially, please visit the Patreon page at patreon.com/JasonRigdon. Please send any suggestions, compliments, or complaints to jasonrigdon@gmail.com or call our voicemail line at 425-835-2766. Our theme music is Local Forecast by Kevin MacLeod and used under the Film Music Standard License. Please visit incompetech.filmmusic.io for more information. This podcast is copyrighted by Jason Rigdon in 2020 and is freely available under the Creative Commons Attribution License. Thank you for listening and have a great day.